Welcome back. In this video, we'll work on the edit functionality so that you can make a to-do and then click this edit button and a form will appear here instead of what we see right now. And then you can click save and it will be updated. So to do that, we have a little extra behavior where we're basically toggling a form on and off. So we're either displaying this that we see here or we're displaying an input. So we're going to need to go to our to-do component, which is, where are you? Right here. And we're going to have some conditional logic in our render to decide if we're displaying a form or if we're displaying the to-do task. But in addition, we need to keep track of which one is showing. And it's going to change depending on if the user has clicked that button or not. And that means that we need to use some state if that's going to change. So inside of our constructor, we're going to set state, or initial state at least. And let's call the property isEditing. And at the beginning, it should be false. Now down in our render, we're going to tweak things a bit and use that this.state.isEditing. So we'll do an if this.state.isEditing. If that's the case, let's make a variable just called let result or something. Result will be a div where we have a form inside of it. And that form will do something when we submit it, but for now, it's just going to be an input where type is text, and we'll leave it at that. So that's one option. Otherwise, so we'll do an else. We're going to return, or we're going to set result to be this whole thing. And then at the very end, we'll just return result. Okay, so nothing should change right now, but if I go into my tools over here and I scroll down and I toggle isEditing on my to-do, we now see a form show up. So that part is working. Next, let's make it so that the button is the one toggling it rather than me clicking over here. And to do that, we need to add a onClick here to this button, the edit button. And let's call it this.toggleForm. Well, that method doesn't exist yet, so let's write it, toggle form. And this is super straightforward because all we're doing is setting isEditing to be the opposite of whatever it is. So this.setState isEditing is going to be this.state.isEditing, but the opposite of that. So if it's true, we're setting it to false. If it's false, we're setting it to true. So that will toggle the form. And then we do need to bind it. This.toggleForm equals this.toggleForm.bind this. So at this point, hopefully, I can click on that edit button and I get the form. Now, we don't have a button to submit the form, so we're actually stuck here, but we're at least toggling it once. So let's update our form now so that there's a button so we can submit. So let's say the text is save, and then on our form, let's add an onSubmit event. And this onSubmit event will take whatever new item, whatever data is in that input and save it. And to actually save it, that means passing it up to to-do list, to some method we haven't defined yet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's define our onSubmit. We'll call it this.handleSubmit. And then we'll define it. Actually, you know what? To make this a little clearer, instead of handleSubmit, I'll call it handleUpdate. And then up here, we need to define handleUpdate. And the first thing we'll do is event.prevent default, so the form doesn't refresh or the page doesn't reload. And then eventually we'll take new task data and pass up to parent. But we haven't defined a method to do that. And in addition, we don't have a way of knowing what's in that form right now. It's not a controlled input. So what we always need to do is create something in the state. Let's just call it task. And we can start it as an empty string. So then down here, where we're creating that input, we're going to set the value to be this.state.task, and then we'll give it a name of task. And we also, along with giving it a value, need to do the onChange. So let's do our onChange events and just call this.handleChange, which doesn't exist, but I'm going to copy it over from new to-do form. It's the same handle change that we need. Put it up here and bind it before I forget. This.handleChange equals this.handleChange.bind this. So handle change will just be updating the task. Technically, we don't have to do this event.target.name thing. We could just always set task because there's only one thing that's changing. We only have one input. So now this is a controlled input where the value is set to this.state.task, on change, this.handle change. The problem is that when I edit something, our task is still showing up empty. And that's because the default value at the beginning in our constructor for task is an empty string. What we actually want it to be is this.props.task. We're passing it in right here, right there. Task is equal to to-do.task. So inside the to-do component, we have access to the task in the props. So this is the case where we do need to pass in props there into super. If I click edit, it's now showing up. And I can change something, and we should see, not in the parent state right now, but in the to-do item state, we have something called task, and it is being changed inside a state, not props. That's working now, but if I instead didn't pass in props, I just want to show this to you. It's a good use case, or a good demonstration. We have a problem. It can't read this.props.task because it doesn't have access to props inside the constructor. So we do need to do super props rather than just plain super. All right, so now we have this part. Take the new task data and pass it up to the parent. Okay, so now we have this part. We need to define a method on the parent that will actually take this new task. So we could pass in whatever the updated task is, like walk dog. Let's say it used to be walk dogs, but then one of them tragically died. Now we're updating it to walk dog singular. We need to pass that up to some method inside of our to-do list. So in our to-do list, let's define a method called update or update to-do. And to do the update, we need to know two things. What are we updating? So we'll use an ID to find the item. And then what is the new task? And we'll call that updated task. So we need to call setState at some point, and we need to make a new array that contains all of the old to-dos unchanged. Plus we want to take the to-do that has this ID and change its task to whatever is passed in here, walk dog or something like that. So because we're not supposed to mutate state, this one is a bit long. I'm going to make a separate variable called updated to-dos and do this.state.todos.map. And we'll just call each one to-do. And then inside of here, I'm just going to check if to-do.id is equal to the ID we're looking for. We're going to return, instead of the to-do unchanged, we're going to return the existing to-do, but we're going to update the task. So we don't want to change the ID or anything. We don't want to, if we just did this, we would lose the ID. So this takes the existing stuff from that to-do that we're updating, but overrides the task, changes it to be our updated task. So otherwise, we're just going to return the to-do unchanged. So we haven't really seen editing, but we're mapping over, making a new array, and for each item, if the to-do is not the one we're looking for, we just take it as is and put it in that array. If it is the one we're looking for, we return a new object where we've changed the task, but then we put it in the array, and then at the very end, we need to call this.setState. This one will be simple. We're just going to set to-dos to be that array called updated to-dos we just built right here. So we make this new array, and then we set to-dos to be that new array. Remember, we don't really mutate state directly. It's definitely easier and shorter to do that, but it's not the React way, unfortunately. Okay, so we have this method update. Once again, we need to bind it. So this dot update equals this dot update dot bind this. And then we need to pass it down to our individual to-do. So we'll call it update to-do equals this dot update. Perfect. Now, instead of our to-do, we have access to this dot props dot update to-do, and we need to pass in an ID and then the updated task. So the ID is going to be this dot props dot ID. We already have access to that inside of our to-do. And then the updated task is this dot state dot task. So state dot task is whatever is in the form at that moment. And if we take a look, fingers crossed here, we'll see if it works. Did we bind handle update up top? No, we did not. So we need to do that. This dot handle update equals this dot handle update dot bind this. All right, so now I type something in there. I click edit, and notice what it says right now in the state. Let's change it to ha ha ha. and click save. So we're not seeing the change right now, but if we go into our to-do list and look at the state, hopefully it's updated in here, and it is. It says ha ha ha. The problem is we still have is editing set to true. So we're seeing the is editing mode. We're not seeing the to-do being updated there. So after we update it, we want to set is editing to be false. So this dot set state is editing is now false. So we're not actually toggling it, we're just making it false. We could also just reuse our method called toggle form. This is fine too. Now, if I type something like LOL and I edit it to instead say LOL, it's now been updated. And let's just make sure it works multiple times. Save, and it updates. We can close or we can delete one, and we're basically done. So that's it for the base functionality. Editing was tricky as we saw because the to-do itself has some conditional logic. And as part of that conditional logic, there's a form, which means that we have to have some state to manage that form to control it. In addition, we needed to toggle the form on and off. So we created a property called isEditing to conditionally either render the form or render just the to-do and the buttons. So there's a lot going on. But hopefully I explained it simply enough, hopefully, that you're able to follow it. And in our to-do list, the important stuff, we have our update method. It's a little longer. It looks for the to-do with that ID and it updates it. And then we pass it through as update to-do. Inside of our to-do, we call it inside of handle update, which is called when you submit the edit form. All right, so next we'll talk about styling if you want to stick around and watch that, as well as how do we toggle completion on and off so that I could click and have a strike-through effect. Instead of deleting something, maybe I want that satisfaction of seeing everything I've done today. And then at the end of the day, I can delete them all.